Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Responsible Gaming for Gaming Lounges, presented by the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission in association with Rise Life Management Services. We thank you for joining us today as we embark on our mission to ensure that Jamaican society is one in which our gambling providers apply principles of responsible gaming in the delivery of their services, and that problem gambling and the potential harms of gambling have a minimal negative impact on people in our society. Responsible gaming is the provision of safe and socially responsible and supportive gambling environments where the potential harm from gambling is minimized and people can make informed and appropriate decisions about their participation in gambling. And the Commission aims to ensure that we achieve industry compliance and improve customer awareness and knowledge of responsible gaming via public education, such as and training of the employees in the gaming sector via webinars and other activities such as this. I want to thank you very much for taking the time. It's a very important part of the work that we do to deliver quality gambling services to our publics. Today with us, we have Mrs. Laurie Wigan, who is the Director of Compliance and Regulatory at the BGLC, and she will shortly give some brief opening remarks before we move on to Richard Henry, who many of you already know, who is responsible for the delivery of our responsible gaming program through Rise Life Management. During this session, in order to make it interactive, we're going to be inviting you to respond to some poll questions that we'll put up on the screen. It'll be easy for you to respond to those questions simply by tapping your screen for the response that you prefer, or using your mouse if you're on a computer. So I want us to just do a quick test so that everybody's familiar with how this poll question is going to work. So I'm going to pop up a quick poll question, and which should be pretty easy for you to answer, and ask if you could take within 30 seconds, indicate your response to the question. So the question is going to come up on your screen any minute now. Like really shortly. So we're still waiting on the question to come up. Our technical team is getting that ready for us. But I'll say in the meantime as well that you will also be able to ask questions during the presentation. There are two options for delivering questions, delivering your questions, and that will be by using the Q&A feature on your screen. When you tap that, it will give you an option to type in your question. And if you wish to speak or voice your question, you can just use the raise hand feature on your control panel on your screen, and then I will identify you by name and invite you to open your mic and ask your question, which we can then arrange to have answered. All right, let's see if we can get the poll question to come up now. So what I said before is that we're going to, in order to facilitate engagement, we want to put up a poll question occasionally throughout the webinar and ask you to answer the question. We'll give you a little time to answer the question. They will be simply multiple choice questions with one or two options for responses. So if my tech team could pull up the test poll question so that we can just run a quick test before we go on. All right, poll question having a bit of an issue this morning, but no worries. That's what happens sometimes in this online world. Things don't work as smoothly as we expect. So without further ado, without further delay, I'm going to ask you, oh, I'm not seeing the poll question apparently. Everybody else was seeing the poll question. Sorry, my mistake. I didn't see the poll question. No worries. So if we can put up the results of the poll now, that would be very useful. Okay, so the poll question was,
Joe Gamble.
Do you work in the gaming industry? And only, let's see, based on what I see, 90 plus percent, 96%, 98% of us said yes, and 2% of the people responded no. So the majority of us here are active participants in the gaming industry. Well, thank you very much for your response. And we had responses from over 100 people. So that means everybody gets it. So without further delay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our Director of Compliance and Regulatory, this is Laurie Wigan, who many of you may know, to say a few words just to set the context of why we're here today. Mrs. Wigan?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Responsible Gaming webinar. Now, we all know that problem gambling or gambling addiction is a public health concern. Let us pause on that. Public health concern, not just for Jamaica, it's also in the Caribbean, and it's also globally. People who experience gambling disorders often face other challenges at the same time, such as mental illness, addiction to alcohol and drugs, and also family violence. Now, a couple statistics. Currently, we have 31% women and 69% men enrolled in the voluntary self-exclusion program. However, we've had over 600 requests with an average 5 per month. And of course, most of these people are unwilling to go through the full registration. The social cost of gambling harm to Jamaica is very high. And like all public health concerns, problem gambling or gambling addiction really needs proper understanding, attention, and yes, of course, resources to reduce and even prevent such an harm to, arise in the first place. This is why responsible gaming is a strategic priority for the BGLC in collaboration with our partner, Rise Life. Many of you may have had players exhibiting this condition and voluntarily entering the self-exclusion program. Today, you will learn and be refreshed with information that will assist you in your responsible gaming practices, which will ensure these practices are consistent with the Commission's expectations. Gambling is conducted in a manner to minimize harm to our vulnerable groups. We should always remember that provision of gambling services is designed to encourage players to maintain healthy gambling levels. And of course, both Rise Life and BGLC support your efforts in game responsibly. Again, welcome. I hope you have a fruitful session. Thank you. And I'm now handing you over to Richard Henry, who we all know represents Rise Life and will be conducting this presentation. Over to you now.
Hello and good morning. Richard Henry here from Rise Life Management. I would know most of you. It's unfortunate that we can't, share one-to-one, face-to-face type of activity. Of course, if you know my style, that's what I like to do, to be able to be right there and involved with what it is that's going on. However, nonetheless, we are going to go ahead and get into this presentation. Of course, I'm going to apologize because most of you know that I am a psychologist. And so as a psychologist, I think it's important not only to just to talk about responsible gaming, but I think it's critical that I establish that there is such a thing as a gambling disorder, that where it fits into in terms of the spectrum of disorders, and why it is important that we understand the criteria and how that will help us as we go forward into looking at responsible gaming. So bear with me a little bit. I'm going to try and not be too clinical. I'm also going to try, and most of you who know me, try not to talk too much. We have some polling questions. I have some videos to show you as well, but hopefully to keep you engaged. For those of you who have been through responsible gaming training with me, I mean, we've had this program now for 16 years. This is a refresher. For those of you who are experiencing it for the first time, welcome. And it's wonderful to have you. And we want you to be a part of what I would call the responsible gaming army. And just to let you guys know that comparatively, not just in the Caribbean, but in other jurisdictions, Jamaica's responsible gaming program is an excellent program. And I'm saying it is excellent not just because of the BGLC or because of RISE, it is excellent because of how you guys have, I'm talking about the gaming industry, gaming lounges, how you guys have adapted to the information, how you guys have pushed the programs that we've tried to establish, and the understanding of responsible gaming just among your staff has grown tremendously. But I will go ahead and we have some goals for the session. You probably heard me talk about a few of them a while ago. I want to help you to develop an understanding of addiction and gambling disorders. That's important. I also want you to be able to identify the characteristic features of irrational gambling behavior. And we'll try and do that in a fun type of way. Finally, I want for you to be able to develop an understanding of responsible gaming and its significance to the industry. So we know we have a polling question, and a polling question because I believe that it is important for you as a staff member to understand what your views are on gambling, because I think that that will impact how you interact with patrons, how you assist patrons, how you deal with patrons who you feel have a gambling related issue. So I'm hoping that the polling question will go up, and I can tell you what the polling question is. Gambling is a fairly harmless and entertaining activity. And I don't know if I'll get a cue as to how soon that question will be answered, and the answers will come back to me for just a brief discussion. So gambling is a fairly harmless and entertaining activity. Interesting question. And I've had varying responses before, but like I said, it's important for you to understand where your value system is at working in the industry. And so I guess, let me try and avoid the dead air. I'm hoping that these answers are coming back now, or as I can move on and go right into the presentation. All right. I think I'll get a cue when I can come back and look at what the results are from the poll. So just quickly, not too clinical, but I want you to understand that there are two types of addictions. There's addictions to substances, and there are addictions to processes and behaviors like gambling. Addiction to substances would refer to an addiction to marijuana, to alcohol, to opiates, and other substances that you can physically ingest to the body. Very important to make that distinction. I love asking this question at training, because the answers that I get are not answers that are scientifically defined. They're answers that you guys share from just your raw experience of seeing people, like being out of control. It is a habit, something that you can't stop. And those are all true. The definition that I have here says that an addiction is a condition that results when a person repeatedly ingests a substance or engages in an activity, for example, gambling and sex, that can be pleasurable, but the continuation of which becomes compulsive and interferes with ordinary responsibilities and concerns such as work, family, and social life. Very important for us to pay attention to the fact that in this definition, there's the idea that it can be pleasurable. So you have to understand that is one of the driving forces of why people continue to indulge in the behavior, because it does bring pleasure despite having negative consequences, affects their work, family, and social life. Okay. So 4 characteristics of an addiction. Nothing too clinical. Persons with an addiction will have a compulsion, and that's this feeling like you have to have it. You're thirsty, you have to have a drink or a glass of water. That happens to persons with an addiction. I have to go to the gaming lounge. And that compulsion will lead you into problems, and it transitions into the second characteristic, loss of control over involvement with the substance or activity. And both are evenly matched in terms of characteristics, because the compulsion flows into the person losing control and not being able to make good decisions. For example, I'm to be at work, but my brain is telling me I need to go to the gaming lounge because today is the day that I'm going to win. And so person will make up some excuse, head to the gaming lounge. And this could happen repeatedly over days, over weeks, over months, until eventually the person loses their job. And so by loss of control, we're talking about an inability to make good decisions. Very important, you've heard me talk about this quite often, negative consequences from use or activity. And every addiction has negative consequences. Every addiction has more negative consequences than benefits. And one of the problems that we have is that people who are deep in the addiction are unable to see the negative consequences clear enough to be able to move away. And so one of the things that we do with people in treatment is to help them simply to make a decision. Give me a list of the things that are beneficial from your gambling. Give me a list of the things that are consequences from your gambling. And I can tell you that ultimately the consequences override the benefits. And so what we're trying to do is to show them that if you have a behavior that has more negatives than positives, it's not rocket science. It means that that behavior needs to go. And last but not least, a fourth characteristic I want to talk about is denial. And so, yes, there are a lot of people who are in denial about their gambling, even more so because of the nature of the addiction of gambling. If somebody is abusing alcohol, they can drink until they're drunk. There's evidence that this is a problem. A lot of times, there's not a lot of evidence for persons who are gambling in a way that is disordered. And so you keep having to try and bring proof. A lot of times the proof is just in your finances. The proof is in how the family is reacting to you. The proof is in the time that you spend in the gaming lounge, etc. But we have to work with people who are oftentimes in denial about their gambling. And so one of the key things we have to do is to get them into a place where they recognize, and again, by doing some of the negative consequences versus benefits, for them to understand this is a problematic behavior for you. Oh, the polling. Well, let me know when I can have a look at that. I'll be more than happy to discuss some of that. So I want to establish that we have had a difficulty a lot of times, especially when we started at Rise, that we are not against gambling, and people thought that, and that we're supposed to be the champions of advocating no gambling, and that's not true. We recognize that gambling always was and will be an important part of history and a prevailing form of entertainment for the rich and the poor alike. And key, gambling has become increasingly legitimate and socially acceptable, especially here in Jamaica. If you reflect on 15 years ago, how much gambling we had happening in all spectrums, you would have been able to realize that the gambling in Jamaica has grown exponentially. And so as it grows, we have to provide the requisite services that will assist people, the few that will develop a gambling-related problem. All right.
Never mind, she's responding.
So, again, I was resisting being clinical. So when I go through this gambling disorder diagnostic criteria, let me preface it by just saying this is very important, because up to 5 years ago, a gambling disorder or a gambling problem, pathological gambling, was seen as an impulse control disorder. And so now it has shifted into an addiction. And so the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and almost, well, not almost, the Bible of Psychiatry and Psychology, it is now listed in a category that deals with addiction. And that's where we believe that it is its rightful place. And even in moving it, we have changed some of the criteria. And so briefly, here that we would look at when someone comes into the office and says, well, I have a problem with gambling, they would need to meet some of these criteria. So the first one is, needs to gamble with increasing amounts of money in order to achieve the desired excitement. Okay? And so John, who started gambling and placing, would maybe carry $2,000 to the lounge, over time, he begins now to carry $10,000. Where he's getting the money from, because he doesn't have a big job, we don't know. But in terms of him getting excitement and feeling the vibe, so to speak, in the gaming lounge, he now has to make higher and higher bets. Second one is relentless or is restless or irritable when attempting to cut down or stop gambling. And I usually highlight with you guys the people who tell you, I'm cutting up my card, take away my membership, I'm not coming back. And 2 hours later, who's back at your door? Has made repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop gambling. Fourth one is often preoccupied with gambling. And this is very important. Having persistent thoughts or reliving past gambling experiences, handicapping, planning the next venture. And this is significant because we're talking about people here who might be sitting at their desk preparing for a meeting or preparing a report to give to the executive director, but they're unable to concentrate because most of the time they're thinking about last night's gambling experience, how much money they lost, how much they need to win back, how are they going to get money to get a start to be able to win back. What time can I leave work? Can I leave early? Can I make up an excuse at lunchtime to begin the process of chasing? Fifth one, often gambles when feeling distressed, helpless, guilty, anxious, depressed. And this is a major one because you'll see me bring up a couple of slides later that speak to the fact that persons with a gambling disorder, whether it's mild, moderate, and severe, and I'll get to that, oftentimes have a psychiatric condition or another addiction that goes with that. And I bring up psychiatric condition because the last two speak to anxious or depressed. The problem with that is that the person who gambles because they're anxious or depressed, when they go to the gaming lounge, they feel good when they're gambling. That's problematic because the next time when they leave the gaming lounge, they feel depressed. What do they plan to do? They go back to the gaming lounge because that's a space in which they feel better. And so in some sense, they're doing what we call self-medicating. The problem with that is that most of them can't afford to spend the way that they need to spend in the gaming lounge to be able to stay there and keep that good feeling, because what they really need to get is treatment. Sixth one is, after losing money gambling, often returns another day to get even. And I'm sure you have seen many persons within your gaming lounge that do what we call chasing. And the idea is, yesterday was just a bad day. I need to win back my money. The gaming lounge is way ahead of me. But today I'm going to wear my lucky socks, or I'm going to bring my lucky rabbit's foot, or I'm going to bring some rice, or whatever it is. I'm going to change the way that I sit, but I'm coming back to chase again. And most persons with a gambling disorder, especially a severe gambling disorder, are always chasing. Seventh one, lies to conceal the extent of involvement with gambling, and that happens a lot within the family. Eighth one is, has jeopardized or lost significant relationship, job, or educational opportunity or career opportunity because of gambling. Again, very significant. Why? Because this criteria fits also across the spectrum of substance abuse as well. It's not rocket science, it's not new science. An addiction has certain specific criteria that affects everybody. And so there are persons who have lost their jobs. And I'm sure you know them because of their gambling, because they've spent more time in the gaming lounge than they spend at work. They spent more time trying to accumulate money to gamble than they do at work. And the work performance also begins to drop. The ninth and final one relies on others to provide money to relieve desperate financial situations caused by gambling. And in other words, we call this a bailout. And I can tell you, 95% of persons who come in for gambling related issues need a bailout. And a bailout oftentimes causes problems in terms of a treatment moving forward. Why? Because while you're trying to do counseling, this person is not listening to what's going on or doing any introspection. They're more worried about how is it that I'm going to pay the bank back? How is it I'm going to pay my friend back? How will I pay the bookie? The salary is gone. How am I going to pay the bills? And there are always these problems that we have to help them to solve first before they are willing and open to be receptive to treatment. And a lot of times, as you're going to see when I introduce you to my client, it is family members that have to come and bail them out. And oftentimes family members can't afford it either. Just quickly, there are 9 criteria. If you meet 4 or 5, you have a mild gambling disorder. If you meet 6 to 7, you have a moderate gambling disorder. And if you meet 8 to 9 of the criteria we just discussed, you have a severe gambling disorder. And this is coming from when we used to talk about pathological and problem gambling. Those definitions they're now gone. We're now talking about having a gambling disorder, mild, moderate, severe. I hope you made it through all that clinical material. I'll try not to give you too much more of that. We're looking at continuum here in terms of gambling behavior. And this, I should have said at the very start that one of the things I want you to do while you're going through this session is not just think about the clients that you have, but for those of you who gamble, and we've been through this through training, I know quite a few of you do, there's nothing wrong with that. I would like for you to be able, as we go along, to also do an assessment of your own gambling. You will see later on that you belong to one of the vulnerable groups to developing a gambling related problem. So not just thinking about your clients or your patrons, I want you to also think about yourself and your gambling, if it is that you go to other gaming lounges, etc. All right, so on a continuum, you have persons, and see where you fit here. No gambling, you don't gamble at all. That's a level 1. You do experimentation, so you gamble sometimes when you feel like, not very often. You're a social gambler. You may go to the gaming lounges maybe once a week with money that you can afford to lose. Here's where it gets tricky, is that you fall into the place where you have a mild gambling problem. And remember, that is 4 to 5 of that criteria. Moderate gambling problem, 6 to 7, and severe, 8 to 9 of those criteria. If you fit in where it is that you're a social gambler, I'd want for you to still take some markers, look at your gambling, look at your spending, and see if it is progressing into another place. Because once you pass social and get into a gambling related problem, you're going to need some help. So if we talk about some unique characteristics of gambling disorders, and gambling is a very unique activity. The disorder is a very unique disorder. And if you notice how long it has taken, as I explained to you, to fall into the addiction section of the DSM, you must know that we've had a lot of persons who varying ideas from varying clinicians and researchers, etc. But we're settling in now on the fact that it's an addiction, and significantly, it is a hidden addiction. So the example I always give is, if I have a client who is smoking marijuana, he comes into my office, he says, I haven't smoked all week. I can always say, no problem. I can say, come back in the week. When he comes back, I can still test him and find the marijuana in his system. Now, the difficulty with dealing with persons with a gambling addiction is that I have no such evidence. So there's no evidence for me to say, well, let me see your hands, see if you've been pressing the machine. Nothing like that happens. And so we tend to sign a contract with persons who come in for a gambling related issue that states that I have the authority to be able to speak to your family members, because those are the persons, we call that some collateral information. Those persons will help to tell us. And I have had clients who have done better because I was able to speak to his mother, who knew his pattern, knew when he was upset and irritable, what was going on, and she was able to report that to me, and I was able to confront the client, and he eventually said, yes, I am back gambling. I had no test for that. I had to rely on collateral information. Second unique characteristic, as long as there is money, an overdose is not possible. And of course, persons with a gambling disorder are always looking for money to get them a start, to be able, hopefully, to continue to try and win. Oftentimes it is that they lose and they have to go back out to try and find some more money, oftentimes selling a lot of valuable stuff. Gambling is not usually perceived as a disorder. And I can tell you over the past 5 to 10 years, that is slowly changing. And we're in a very, very good place now where because of extensive research, people are now accepting that, yes, it is a disorder, it is treatable, we can do a diagnosis, there is a prognosis, and so we can follow a treatment spectrum. And sadly, unique characteristics of gambling, few resources are available for those that are affected. And that is tremendously tragic. We are trying to change that by having the program we have here in Jamaica, thanks to the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission, because most other Caribbean islands, if not all, do not have such a program. These programs are even scarce in the United States of America. And so the assistance for persons affected by gambling disorders is few and far between. We had a Gamblers Anonymous that used to run maybe 10 years ago or even further back, and has run into problems. Now I have to call and refer people to the person who runs that program directly because they don't have regular meetings. And that's something that has to change, because Gamblers Anonymous is a group of persons who have had gambling related problems that meet to discuss, to share how it is that they have stopped gambling. And it is a meeting, is a standalone meeting that should happen once a week. And so maybe that is something that we have to provide some support to the persons who are trying to revive the Gamblers Anonymous, so there's more support for persons. And of course, affected persons can call Rise Life Management Services and set up an appointment and have their treatment plan initiated. So there are a lot of ideas about how people get into gambling. And just in discussion, we have seen quite a few of those, but those that have been documented, persons get into disordered gambling to escape. And we talked about that earlier. And escape means escaping stress and problems. I can talk about a client I had that tried to escape because her marriage was not going well and was introduced to gambling by her husband, who did not have a gambling problem, but she ended up spending a lot of time in the gaming lounge because it made her feel better about what was happening at home. Also, people deal with specific problems and get into disordered gambling, psychological as well as psychiatric problems, such as depression and anxiety, which may lead them to gamble as a coping strategy. And I mentioned a little bit about this earlier on another slide, and there are other slides that will come up that's going to show you that there's a very, very high correlation between persons with a gambling disorder and a psychiatric or psychological condition. And of course, I can't even say, I would not say my favorite, but the one that I find to be very popular. Persons end up with a gambling disorder. Most, if not all, usually have a first early big win. And that big win really sits in your brain. And it may have taken place 5 to 10 years ago. and you're losing, and person start to think about, well, maybe I should cut back or maybe I should stop. And that big win is what is going to galvanize the person to say, well, if I did it then, I can do it again. And I think in my tenure as a therapist dealing with persons with a gambling related problem, I can tell you I've only come across one client who had who did not have a first early big win. And I found that to be very, very interesting. Most, if not all others, have a big win that they can sit and explain to you, and some have several big wins, and they can explain to you the emotional, the feeling that they get from it, how exciting it was, and the picture of all of that, even 5 years ago, sits in the brain. And so the thought of, well, maybe I will quit next week because maybe that can happen again. Um, so I'm sorry I didn't show you the slide, bring up the slide from the start that talks about how persons, the percentage of persons that have a gambling disorder, because we're not talking about a lot of persons, but we're talking about a significant enough group that warrants us to have a program that provides support. And I'm bringing this up because we're talking about the ills of gambling for some persons and the impact that it has. We just spoke about most of those impacts are the impact on the person themselves. But if we talk about the impact on the family, that too is also very, very significant. And so there's a whole variety of financial, physical, and emotional problems, i.e., divorce. And I have seen that firsthand with husband being upset with wife who is gambling, or the other way around, repeatedly asking them to get help. And then some of the debt, sorry, comes down to the family and to the wife who is financially connected to her husband that she has to clear. And all that frustration ends up having an impact on that relationship, and people sever ties. Significantly, a gambling disorder can also cause child abuse and neglect. And so there are times when persons should be home taking care of the kids. They're not there, or they may have told the 6-year-old to be in charge until they get back because they just got a vibe that they can go to the gaming lounge and win something, and they take off. The child abuse comes with not having the money, being in an irritable mood, always being angry and frustrated, and you take it out on the family. And if I go back, it also relates to domestic violence. And so there's a lot of that takes place between husbands who are gamblers, who have issues with their gambling and are frustrated because they're not winning and because they can't pay the bills. And to some extent, they're not the man of the house anymore because it is now the wife who has gone out, taken up a job to be able to pay the bills, take care of the kids, etc. And so, in his feeling upset about that, oftentimes there's domestic violence. And domestic violence, we're not just talking about physical, we're not just talking about physical activity, we're talking about emotional and mental type of abuse that affects people. So I thought this would have been an interesting slide to share with you. Uh, I'm sorry that we don't yet have our Jamaican data to be able to share. Hopefully we will shortly. But gender differences in terms of gambling, and I often ask in training, do you guys see more women in the gaming house? And that's really just anecdotal, but we would like to have that kind of data to be able to understand the demographics. But this is international stuff here. Women tend to begin gambling later than men, which is good, because the earlier that you begin gambling increases the likelihood of you developing a gambling related problem. Women develop gambling problems more rapidly than men. However, women also seek treatment earlier than men. And I think that also translates into dealing with regular physical illness and how women deal with their body. And if they're ill, they'll go to the doctor, and men have a tendency not to go. And so women going and seeking treatment earlier will help the family, will help them in terms of dealing with their gambling addiction and being able to go back into the family and function in a healthier way, and making the family a more healthy place. So we talked about a little bit about gambling disorders and psychiatric illnesses. And this is just a slide to really highlight uh, the connection, because the connection is very real and the connection is very, very important, especially for treatment. And I should tell you that persons who have what we call dual diagnosis, so you have a psychiatric condition, you also have an addiction, are very, very difficult to treat. It's very difficult to overcome that because you have to treat both addictions, or both problems rather, independently. So there's a high correlation between persons who have a severe gambling disorder and alcohol use disorder. And I'm not sure if you can reflect and think about, do you have any persons that are in the gaming lounge who you think drink a little bit too more? They're gaming, but they drink a little bit more than they really should. And reflect on that, because from one study that I have here, 73% of persons with a severe gambling disorder had an alcohol use disorder as well. That same study talks about 38% had a drug use disorder. So they're not using alcohol. We're talking about specifically now, maybe using marijuana, they may be using cocaine, etc. Interestingly, 60.4% had a nicotine dependence issue. And so these are people that are smoking, and that nicotine is coming from tobacco. So again, reflect on how many smokers you think you have or you have seen at your gaming lounge. And probably, well, they have to smoke outside, hopefully. 49, almost 50% had a mood disorder. And a mood disorder, speaking specifically about depression, and there are varying types of depression. And I gave you an example earlier of the person who goes to the gaming lounge because they're depressed, may have lost a loved one, they may be grieving, the depression may be clinical. But when they get to the gaming lounge, because of the environment, because of the vibe, because of the friends, maybe because of winning, they feel better. And so what they are beginning to do is to learn the mood swing. And so when they leave, they find, why do I feel like this again? But I feel better when I'm there. And so they end up there. Now, I always say to you guys, please don't go back and do any assessment on your patrons, because you're not clinicians. But there, I would assume that if we were to do a survey and do some screening, we would find that there are a few of your patrons who suffer from a mood disorder, specifically depression. 41% may suffer from an anxiety disorder. And I have had clients specifically with anxiety disorders, that obsessive compulsive disorder, that feel a lot more calm while they're in the gaming lounge or in the mode of betting. And 60%, this is just from one study, had a personality disorder, and that can vary as well. So if we come back to a little bit more in terms of facts about gambling disorders, and I guess I'm going to be unapologetic about giving you all this information about gambling disorders, because it's important for us to set this up so you have an understanding that when we're talking about responsible gaming and the need for it, we're talking about a very real issue. Persons with gambling disorders are more likely to report that their parents had gambling-related issues. Read that again. Persons with a gambling disorder are more likely to report that their parents had gambling-related issues. Research suggests that the earlier a person begins to gamble, the more likely he or she is to developing a gambling problem. More likely doesn't mean it has to happen, but we have had many instances where I'm interviewing clients who come in because they have a gambling-related problem, and when the history takes me back, they can speak to their gambling beginning in adolescence, beginning because they lived in the yard where the gambling took place. And so they have been, this is something that they've been doing, they've been involved with. It is almost a way of life. Okay, and so that for us is a red flag when someone comes in with that, because there's a lot that has to be unpacked and undone. All right, I spoke to you earlier about vulnerability and that persons who work in gaming lounges are vulnerable to developing a gambling problem. And I want to really classify this because it doesn't mean that you're going to. The majority of persons who work in a gaming lounge do not develop a gambling related problem. However, if you have what we call an addictive personality, if you have certain environmental and emotional conditions going on elsewhere, it can lead to you beginning, getting involved, liking it, using it as a coping mechanism. And because you work in that environment, you are bombarded daily by what's taking place and what seems to be exciting for you. So if we look at groups that are vulnerable, we're talking about youth, because they're high risk takers. Youth, and of course, if we talk about youth, we're talking about nobody under 18 years old can go into the gaming lounge. But when studies are done usually about gambling disorders, especially with youth, underage gambling, the rate of underage gambling is usually higher in terms of developing problems than adults, because adolescence is seen as a period of high risk taking, high energy, wanting to take some risk and do something different. Second group is elderly, and that's because of what? Some social isolation. They may have lost a family member or lost a husband, and or a wife, and they're at home, they're lonely. Again, specifically, I can think of clients that I've had. There's nothing to do. In some countries, the retirement home loads people up in buses and takes them to the casino. Of course, we don't have casinos in Jamaica, but takes them to the gaming lounge as a form of social activity. Most of them probably won't develop a gambling problem, but some of them may like it a little bit too much. And we come to the third group, which is yourself, gaming lounge staff. And again, during this presentation, I want you to, if you are a gambler, to take stock of your own gambling. And just to throw it out there, I've had persons who work in the gaming lounge in Jamaica that are on the voluntary self-exclusion program. Okay, I've had persons who work in the gaming lounges who come to get help, to get treatment for a gambling-related problem. And the fourth group, we've been talking about this for quite a while, persons with comorbidity, psychiatric condition, as well as an addiction to a substance or to something else. Those persons are usually most vulnerable. All right, so we've talked a lot about gambling disorders and the origins. We've looked at the criteria and the characteristics. I've given you some examples. Now I'm wanting to introduce you to Joe Gambler. Some of you may have known him already, but I'm going to introduce you to Joe Gambler, who many years ago came in for treatment. And some of the feature characteristics that we have talked about before, you'll see in this animation, if you can play it.
Meet Mr. Joe Gambler, who stole over $8 million. Mr. Joe is a 40-year-old male who still lives at home with his parents. He has a gambling history of 10 years, and he was diagnosed with a psychiatric condition, OCD, with intrusive thoughts. He feels less discomfort with his condition when he is gambling. Mr. Joe worked for one of the most prominent banks in Jamaica. He had access to clients' accounts, where over a period of time he withdrew over $6 million, not his money, but which he did spend in local gaming lounges. Given his family's status and connections, he was put on probation and the sum paid back by his elderly parents. 2 years later, he fraudulently acquires $2 million for goods he was commissioned to sell. He collected the cash to turn over to his company, but felt that with his luck and skill, he could turn the $2 million into $4 million at the gaming lounge. His 4 brothers don't talk to him, and because of this there is conflict between family members who were once close. His parents have frequent conflict with regard to how he is to be treated. His parents have used their retirement money to bail out Joe, and as such their future looks bleak. Joe Gambler again loses another job, and is in denial about his gambling disorder. He reveals that he has a special skill that enables him to win at roulette. He does not bathe before he goes gambling as he does not want to wash off the luck. He tends to wear the same clothing to the gaming lounge. While he is gaming, he does not drink or eat anything using his left hand. Finally, Joe Gambler comes in for a treatment as his family has threatened to sever ties and support. You have concerns about your own or someone else's gambling? Call Rise Life Management Services, 57 East Street, 1-888-991-4146.
Okay. Great. And just before the polling question goes up, I think Joe Gambler, and I can tell you, Joe Gambler is doing much better now, but Joe Gambler encapsulates everything that we just talked about. He had a psychiatric condition that needed to be treated. While he was gambling, he felt less stress and less intrusive thoughts. For those of you who don't know what OCD is, and so he had repetitive thoughts in his head about things that he should do. So he'll leave and wonder if the door is closed. And he'll go back and check the door to see if the door is closed 10 to 15 times, just giving you a number. So imagine having those thoughts and you've closed the door and your thoughts are going again. No, the door is not closed. And he felt that when he went to the gaming lounge, he felt better about, he didn't feel those thoughts. He wasn't having those emotions. And so he had less anxiety. You saw the dynamic of it having an issue with his family and what it did to a family that was once close. I witnessed the arguing, very difficult situation between parents, husband and wife, who were always close, about how to deal with Joe Gambler, and causing a split, and husband sleeping in one room, wife sleeping in another. Again, this is because of the gambling related issue. And of course, you saw Joe Gambler in denial about his own gambling and what the problems were. And again, and something that we're going to move on and talk about really quick, the way in which Joe Gambler thought. And so he had all these consequences from his gambling. And we saw consequences as one of the criteria for having a gambling disorder and continuing to get into the behavior. But you saw Joe Gambler getting into trouble, getting a bailout, and then doing the same thing again, and then bailing out and doing the same thing again. And it only stopped when he did not get the third bailout. He had to sit and look at himself and realize nobody's coming to help me now. This is an issue and I will need to be able to address it. I need to go and get treatment. So quite a few of the criteria are information, stuff that we did discuss, came up in that animation about Joe Gambler. And Joe Gambler is a real person. Like I said, he's doing a lot better now. Sorry about that. The polling question. I assume that the polling question is up. Do you often see or encounter patrons who you believe have a gambling related problem? Will I be able to see the results of this? I'm assuming that the polling question is up. Do you often see or encounter patrons who you believe have a gambling related problem?
So Richard, the poll question is on the screen.
Yes.
So you can answer, and then at the end, I will go through the responses to the poll questions. Do you want to entertain any questions from any participants? We had hands raised by 2 persons.
Okay.
I saw a hand raised by Omar Irving.
Yeah.
Omar, would you like to open your mic and ask your question? Omar, you can unmute your mic. Okay, another hand raised is Christelle Derizio. Christelle, you can unmute your mic to ask your question. If you still have that question, I see your hand went back down. Okay, so we're not getting a response. Please remember, if you have a question, you can select the Q&A option on your screen and type in your question, and we certainly will address the question. Okay, so Richard, you can continue, and we will have the responses to the poll question at the end of the session.
All right, thank you very much, Jeanette. Okay, so let's drive forward because we still have a few slides or a few things to talk about. I promise not to be clinical anymore, and so hopefully I can reel you back in. Promise you though that the clinical stuff we just talked about is very important to increase your knowledge base and your understanding of gambling disorders. So always ask this question: what percentage of persons worldwide are believed to have a gambling disorder? And maybe this should have been a polling question, but nonetheless, I'll tell you, 0.1% to 5.3% of persons worldwide. The difficulty with this, folks, is that there aren't enough studies being done on gambling disorders worldwide. And so from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, you will find that the rate of prevalence of gambling disorders will change, will shift. However, in a place like Norway, it is 0.2%, 5.3% in a place like Hong Kong, 0.5 to 1%, in Australia, and in the United States, 0.4% to 1.1%. And you see that there's always this gap of from to because of the scarcity, the dearth of science and studies and data that we need to bring to the field of gambling disorders. And that's why I keep repeating that what we have here in Jamaica, what we're doing is way in keeping with a lot of first world countries with much larger gaming industries. And so we are way ahead of the game. Significantly, 10 to 12% of persons with a gambling problem present for help, which means that 90 to 88% of persons are not getting help. However, what helps us though is that 33% of persons get well on their own with no specialized treatment. And so that in itself gives us a lot of hope. So they don't need to go, they don't go to Gamblers Anonymous, they don't come in for treatment, they just decide, I need to stop doing this, and they stop. And these are persons that have severe gambling disorders, right? The Jamaica Child and Adolescent Gambling Survey 2007, though very dated, it is the only study that we have, not only in Jamaica, but the English-speaking Caribbean. And happy to say, if I can go ahead, Jeanette, to say that we are going to embark on a study on gambling among adults in Jamaica. And the BGLC has committed to provide the funding to do that. And that is going to commence in April. And we are extremely happy and excited about that. Again, that's going to bring valuable data, not just to Jamaica, not just to the region, but internationally. There are not enough studies done. But from that study, it told us that 1 in 5 adolescents were deemed of having or at risk for developing a gambling-related issue. We're talking about what, 14 years ago. That's a very high figure, 1 in 5, because you're talking about 20%. 14 years ago, we would want to know, where's that 20% now? Are they still gambling? Do they still have gambling-related issues? Have they developed further gambling-related issues? And so that's why it's so important to have continuity of studies to be able to assess and understand these situations. You've heard me say this a million times. I did not start out the session this way. Persons with a gambling-related issue have issues in cognition. They have issues with the way that they think about their ability to influence a game of chance. You saw that with Joe Gambler, who said that he had a skill to beat the roulette. He has no skill to beat the roulette. And but in his mind, he's thinking that there are certain things that if I continue to do them, it will give me good fortune. They perceive cause and effect relationships where there are none, while ignoring key concepts such as randomness and luck. And so for a lot of persons with severe gambling disorders, the idea of luck is non-existent. They are winning because their ducks have lined up. They're doing things in a particular way. They're winning because they're carrying rice and vinegar to the gaming lounge. They're winning because they're only pressing the button or pulling the bar with the left hand, etc. And as we say that, we're going to move to talking about some of those thinking errors. So persons with gambling disorders have issues with the way that they think. I'm going to move briskly through these because we have to get to responsible gaming, and I think we only have a half an hour left. Gamblers forget or deny that the outcomes of games of chance are determined by chance and not by their skill. They develop an illusion of control where they overestimate their influence over a game. They perceive cause and effect where there's actually no cause and effect. Here are some. And we won't do all of these, so it's giving you an idea. Selective memory. Recall of past wins is easier than recall of past losses. And usually the past losses, the past win is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the losses are very recent. But what sits in their mind, we call that euphoric recall, and your brain's ability, your mind's ability to only remember the good things. And so this is some of the unpacking that we have to do with persons when they come for treatment. Magnification of skill, the belief that he or she has found a way to outsmart the system, which is not true. Superstitions, behavioral, the belief that particular rituals and actions can favorably affect the odds of winning, like Mr. Joe Gambler did not bathe before he went to the gaming lounge because he didn't want to wash off his luck. Yeah, and he had a ritual that he would do around his car before he goes into the gaming lounge because he felt that that was tied to winning. Wouldn't change his clothes because that suit of clothes that he won in is his lucky suit. And so these are some of the superstitions. Remember, it's just with the way that you think that people have that go into the gaming lounges, that have problems with gambling rather. Talismanic superstitions, belief that possessing certain objects increases the chances of a big win. And you guys have told me all the time, people carrying rice, people carry peas, vinegar, name it, into the gaming lounge, garlic, salt, because they believe that it will help them to win. And of course, guys, we're establishing there's absolutely no connection between rice and vinegar and winning on the machine, okay? Giving inanimate objects human characteristics. We call that anthropomorphism. So persons in the gaming lounge, rubbing the machine, talking to the machine. Come on, baby, as if the machine is alive. Don't do me like that, you can do better, etc. And you guys have told me that you've seen people in the gaming lounge actually talking to the machine in much the same way. We call that anthropomorphism, giving inanimate objects human characteristics that makes them feel that they're involved and that something different can happen by virtue of how they relate to the game. And the gambler's fallacy, erroneous belief in the law of averages, that is a series of losses must inevitably be followed by a win. So that's why you have people that say they're watching a game and saying, well, all right, he's lost enough on that game. I'm now going to win on the game. So they wait until someone comes off to try and get on a game and that sort of thing. And so the machines, as you know, are not calibrated to play in any particular way. And so whether someone has been playing it for hours and has lost does not mean that you will now come and win. But people attach that because their belief in the law of averages that they're now going to win. Or if a machine is hot and they're going to win on that machine now. All right. So I want to we're almost through with this section dealing with gambling disorders. And so we want to look at a video, risk factors for gambling problems. And I think going forward now, we're into responsible gaming, and then we'll tie it up and we're all done. Have a look at this video, risk factors for gambling problems.
There are certain factors that may increase the risk that someone will develop problems with gambling. Some of these include family history of alcohol, misuse of drugs, gambling and overspending problems. Some others are financial problems, Having a big win early on. Stressful life events, loneliness, depression and anxiety. History of trauma, mental health, substance misuse issues. Misunderstanding of how games work. Being impulsive, a risk taker, easily bored. Belief that persistence in gambling pays off. Sometimes, one or a combination of these risk factors can move gambling from a fun form of entertainment to a behavior with negative consequences. If you have concerns about your own or someone else's gambling, call Rise Life Management Services, 57 East Street, 1-888-991-4146.
All right. And so I think we've covered enough about gambling disorders, and I'm sure that by now you have a greater appreciation for some of the issues that you may have been seeing inside the gaming lounge with some persons who appear to have some level of a gambling disorder. Think about what's the percentage of persons worldwide. We're hoping that through the study that we'll do here, and hopefully starting in April, we'll begin to have a look at what's that dynamic in Jamaica. What's the rate of gambling disorders in Jamaica? That's important information as well for us to have. We currently don't have that, so we're going on international data. Okay, so we're going to talk now about responsible gaming as we head towards the end of this presentation. And so I've tried to set up gambling disorders, addiction, and that's why we have responsible gaming. And I am hoping that you have a greater appreciation now, just from seeing all that people endure, all the problems that develop within the family, personal problems having to do with work, etc., and also psychiatric, psychological issues, that we have the need to have a good responsible gaming program. So what we know about the gaming industry, we know it's highly regulated. Regulators play a significant role, and the regulator, of course, is the BGLC here. Key role, ensuring the integrity of games, venues, and collecting revenue due to the authority. The industry, however, is evolving, and we have to appreciate that. And I think some of the evolving of the industry has allowed the role of the regulator to change and to adapt to new challenges, especially here. So the model that we have in Jamaica, and again, there are two models, right, for responsible gaming. The one that is, I believe, becoming a little bit more popular, not popular enough yet, but in some jurisdictions with greater gambling opportunities, there is the regulator-driven responsible gaming. And so that can look like the government or semi-government BGLC connecting with civil society organization like RISE to be able to translate, transmit, send information to, and guide a responsible gaming program instead of having it in-house at the BGLC. There's a model where the regulator does the responsible gaming program, but those aren't as popular, I think, as the regulator contracting someone, an organization outside of it to be able, and still having all the power and authority to help to guide the program and to develop the program as well, but not the burden of executing the program. So the definition of responsible gaming. Responsible gaming may be interpreted, and let's break this down, as a situation where individuals, communities, governments, and gaming industry players. So this is not an issue for the government of Jamaica. This is not an issue for the Betting, Gaming, and Lotteries Commission. This is not an issue where these individuals have gambling problems, they need to deal with it. This is a collective issue, and an issue where individuals, communities, governments, and the gaming industry players like the gaming lounges have to be involved. We have to agree upon certain principles and policies that's going to ensure that gambling is safe and fair. When we do that, we will be able to minimize the possible negative effects of gambling related disorders. And we just spoke extensively about that. So we're not hiding the fact that there are a few people that will develop problems, and those problems will trickle down to family and society and community. Okay? And increase the likelihood, and I like this part, of economic benefit to all, which is, apart from providing entertainment, mainly what we set out to do, create some economic benefit. Let me go forward. There is another polling question, but I will tell you exactly when to do the last polling question. I was going to throw it in, but let's wait. This slide is very important, and very important because of the experience that I have had starting this program 16 years ago. When I would go to some gaming lounges, people would turn me out. And I have no problem sharing that. They were not interested. And I would go back to the BGLC and say, well, we're doing some things good, but I'm not getting the buy-in. And I'll be honest with you, the then director said to me, you're going to have to use your persuasive ability. So I was hoping that he would say, well, the BGLC is going to come behind you and raise the hammer and say, you need to do this. But by going back in and trying to persuade and explain and help people to understand the importance of responsible gaming, I think that's the exact reason why we have moved from denial, if you're looking at the chart, to compliance. Because compliance is not going to come just because you're forced. You're not going to get 100%. And I can tell you that right now, with all the gaming lounges in Jamaica, we have 100% compliance. And you guys should be, for lack of a better word or better words, should big up yourself for that. And I think that's why we have evolved so well, because we've moved from compliance to integration, where people have now taken the information, taken on the program, the voluntary self-exclusion. I have people calling me, just yesterday I did 4. And I did 4 because the gaming lounges got in contact with me, referred persons. And so you are part of integrating the information. And I think as a result of that, we are now at a place where we are developing a culture of responsible gaming. And if I was to take a snapshot of when we started and where we are now, they're 2 different pictures. And I think we have done reasonably well. We still have a ways to go, but I think we have done reasonably well in creating that culture of responsible gaming. I think I can walk into any gaming lounge and have some kind of conversation with any staff member about responsible gaming, about some aspect of responsible gaming, and they'll be able to share with me. And I mean, I've done that before, just as a test to understand, where people are, and I've seen it happen. I've seen security guards come to training, work in the gaming lounge, be able to explain and to say, sir, I'm really happy that you explained this to me, because I keep having patrons come to me and talk to me, and I knew nothing. Now, we're not asking him to be a therapist, but he has to have some kind of knowledge of responsible gaming. All right, so why is it important? Let's just go quickly. We need to care about our customers, and you can tell me when you don't agree, and work to provide an enjoyable, healthy entertainment experience, because that's what most people want. If our customers enjoy their experience, they're more likely to come back. Ideally, all customers would gamble within their limits, but we of course know, like people like Joe Gambler, that some do not. Those that repeatedly overspend are likely to develop a gambling disorder if they have not already. Persons with gambling disorders do not set limits, and so there are times when we have to set limits for them. Now, here's the truth. When the problem of a gambling disorder becomes bad enough with a customer, you're going to lose that customer anyway. Yeah? Because I can tell you, you lost Joe Gambler. And Joe Gambler went to gaming lounges here in Jamaica. We'll stay nameless. But because he developed a gambling disorder, he had to go to treatment. there are persons with gambling disorders who end up going to jail. Because one of the things that we're trying to develop and hopefully advocate for is what we call a gambling court. Because a lot of times people commit fraud because they're stealing money to go and gamble. Such a court exists in the United States of America. I think they have 2 or 3 courts, and it's something that we can further discuss. But I'm bringing it up is to say that Joe Gambler, he went to treatment. Jill Gambler, she may go to jail. People may move away. And sadly, there is a high correlation between persons with a gambling disorder and a mood disorder like depression who end up committing suicide. Haven't heard of any such cases here yet in Jamaica, but that is not uncommon. So if we tie that up, the person with a gambling disorder is not a good client because they're not going to be consistent. I've often said to you that a good client is John and James who can afford to spend $10,000 per week because that's their disposable income. And they like the vibe, they like the food, they like the ladies, they like the friends that come there, they like the entertainment value. And John and James are going to come back next Friday. And they're going to come back the following Friday, and they're going to do that maybe for the next 10 years. Those are good clients. Those are good customers. Good customers aren't people who have to steal to be able to support their habit and get into all manner of illegalities to be able to continue gambling. Those people eventually disappear from the system. And of course, you want to what? Keep your status as a good corporate neighbor. So responsible gaming in a regulated environment exists when consumers, your patrons, can make what? Informed decisions, can exercise rational and sensible choices. Yeah, so in some jurisdictions, you have to know the odds. Because part of the problem is, we spoke earlier, that persons with a gambling disorder have issues with the way that they think. Therefore, they come to your gaming lounge. Most of the troublemakers come to your gaming lounge thinking that the odds of them winning is 2 to 1. And when they don't win, it means that you're stealing, you're cheating. So it's either you, the technician, the cashier, the owner, whoever it is. And we have had these discussions that they're always finding persons with a gambling disorder, the facility, somewhere in the facility to blame. Okay? We want people to be able to make rational and sensible choices. And so when John and James can make a sensible choice that they come to the gaming lounge not to raise money to pay tuition for their children, they come to the gaming lounge to have fun, to have a drink, to have some food, and to go home. That's exercising rational and sensible choice. All right, so we are now at a place where I want to talk about the voluntary self-exclusion program and how important it is to what it is that we do. And I can start off by just saying that most gaming lounges, if not all, have been excellent with the voluntary self-exclusion program. I have to put it in here because it's a key component. Key component. I told you that just yesterday alone, I did 4 persons into the VACP. Okay, so it's a key tool for people to get help. Some of these people will come back to gaming, but just that at this point in time, they're unable to manage their gaming. And so as responsible corporate citizens, we create a program to be able to help them to get back in control of their lives. Okay, so the voluntary self-exclusion program and how it works. Persons can decide to take a ban, and the ban can be from anywhere from 3 months to a lifetime. They can choose, note the word voluntary, and they would fill out a form at your facility that says it is, and I hope everybody's listening. It's a form that says a request to get a ban. It is not a ban. The ban does not take place until Rise Life Management receives that form, contacts the person, and does an extensive intake and interview with a legal document, contract, and uploads them to the system. Then we inform the gaming lounge, John Brown is now in the system. He has a ban for a lifetime. Please enroll him in your program and then ban him. So note very well, You do not have a ban when you sign up the request. The request is just documentation for it to come to Rise Life Management for us to execute what it is. That is the real ban. Okay. Voluntary self-exclusion programs are integral component of any responsible gaming program. And I can tell you, we are a small country, but even in places like the United States, the VSEP is not national. In other words, you can get a ban in Florida, but you're not banned in Kentucky. Like I said, we're a small country, but we are proud of the fact that if you get a ban here in Jamaica, in Montego Bay, you're also banned from the gaming lounge in Kingston because we are one network. Okay, and I think that's a significant achievement for us. The self-exclusion is an option that allows patrons to remove themselves from the temptation of gambling. Okay, and it works because it helps persons to take a break. I've had persons that have said to me, sir, the 1 year is up, I'd like to go back in because during the time that I was out, I was able to finish my house, start a new business, and because of my gambling initially, I was not able to do these things. I took a break, I did what I had to do, and now I feel that I am, and reflected on their gambling as well, and now I feel, and we do counseling with these persons, that I can go back in and do well, control my gambling. All right, so voluntary self-exclusion must not be viewed as a contract by which a patron must keep out of the gaming lounge. So it is a contract, but not just a contract. Rather, it is a tool to be used by a patron, all right? It is not treatment in and of itself, but it's an adjunct to treatment. And I am telling you that it works. It helps a lot of people. It helps persons who take a lifetime as well, because we have to recognize that we are going to get clients who are not able to game and gamble rationally. And it is not about relearning and re-socializing them how to do that. Once they've crossed a particular threshold, there's no going back. The best thing for them is to stay out of gambling, okay? Now, we have been able to also get establish what we call responsible gaming ambassadors. These are very important persons. I talk to them regularly via email, phone calls, and a very important program. And these ambassadors are 2 or more persons within an organization that's involved in the gaming industry, the gaming lounges in particular, who have control, who are able to enter the what we call the database for all the clients that have been registered in the voluntary self-exclusion program, and be able to know who is allowed to come in and who is off of a ban, etc. It's very important to have these persons, and to date, it's been working very, very well. Some of the responsibilities are to communicate to RISE and the BGLC on matters relating to responsible gaming on behalf of their gaming lounge, and they know this. Ensure that all persons enrolled in the voluntary self-exclusion program are blocked from engaging in gaming at the facility. And let me just pause there just to tell you that once someone gets a ban and we have done the paperwork and put them on the database, I then send out an email to the gaming lounges, these ambassadors, saying, John Brown has gotten a ban. Please go up on his information, log him into your system, and then ban him yourself. And so it may take 2 or 3 days for them to go through that process, sorry. And so once that is done, I can officially say to the person, you are now banned, okay? 3 is they have to be able to assist customers, refer to them for enrollment in the self-exclusion, okay? So someone may come to you and say, well, I'm having a problem, I hear about problems, I hear about your self-exclusion program, can I join? And so that's when the form will be filled out and sent to RISE Life Management. Manage and maintain a username and password assigned for the self-exclusion. So it's anonymous, only persons, only the responsible gaming ambassadors have a username and password to be able to get up in the system, to see persons that are banned. Be able to redirect customers, refer to them with regard to distress about gambling. And the truth is, we hope and want everyone in the gaming lounge to have that ability to be able to redirect someone and says self-exclusion, please speak to that person. And that's all any staff member would need to do. Ensure that responsible gaming brochures, posters, and information and the mechanisms that we use for responsible gaming, as requested by the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission, are always in place. All right, I know my time is running out, so I will move forward here a little. I quickly just want to talk about the role of the gaming lounge staff briefly. Gaming lounge employees are the eyes and ears of the operation. They're often the first point of contact or first responder to patrons, and that is very true. While you're not a counselor, you do provide liaison support to guide patrons to the help that they need. So you're very important. Employees can assess situations and present circumstances to manage or security personnel in order to determine next steps, which may include what? Notifying management or security, providing problem gambling information to a patron, listing in a respectful, non-judgmental manner, and understanding the risk of suicide and violence in a particular given situation. And those situations happen within the gaming lounge where people are angry and upset. It is important for employees to promote responsible gambling by adhering to a set of principles and guidelines. Careful. Don't encourage patrons to play longer for higher stakes. That is not your job. You will get into problems, especially when the patron loses. Don't feed patrons superstitions or myths about gambling, such as, oh, this machine hot or this machine cold. That, again, is not your job. And as we've talked about before, you're going to get into problems when the patron loses. They're coming right back to you. Do not tell patrons practice makes perfect. That, again, is not your job. You're lucky today. I'll watch the machine while you take a break. Stuff like that. Patrons can control the outcome of the game. That is not true. So we want you, given the policy, to be limited in the way that you interact in terms of what you tell clients, patrons about gaming. Okay, about the myths of gaming, about whether the machine is hot or cold, because patrons do ask you, which machine hot? Do not point to a particular machine or tell them this machine is hot or cold. When asked, provide information such as gambling is a game of chance. True or not true? It is true. And then the patrons need to know that. The odds of any given game are, if you know the odds, because part of the problem is that people do not know the odds. All right, in the interest of time, and I think we have another video that needs to go up. I should ask Jeanette, I don't think that video 3, because we have an hour and a half. I don't know if we're going to go over, but I'd be more interested in having video 4 go up.
So, Richard, while we give our tech support the opportunity to bring up video 4, responsible gaming principles, let me just say that we do have a few questions that we can address, and we shall take care of those as soon as we come to the conclusion. So we're just waiting on tech support to just bring.
Anyway, time. Let us, if we can, let's do 3 if we can. If not, we can go to 4. I'm flexible on that.
So 3 is about 10 minutes long, if I recall correctly.
6 minutes. 6.
Okay. Well, let's see which one they pull up first, and then we'll go with that.
Okay.
Decide ahead of time how much money you will game with.
Take your family and friends seriously. If they are worried about your gaming, they might be seeing something that you don't see.
If you win big, enjoy. But remind yourself, it doesn't happen every day.
When gaming, take breaks. Walk around, eat, or go outside to clear your head. Keep your head clear when you game.
Don't use gaming to avoid negative feelings or situations such as anger, hurt, disappointment, frustration, depression.
Realize that in most forms of gambling, you have no control over the outcome of the game. It's random and happens by chance.
Talk to someone you can trust if you're concerned about your game.
Keep track of how much time and money you spend on gaming. Set a time limit on how long you will game.
Don't make the hole bigger. Don't chase your losses.
Make an informed decision. Know and understand the odds.
Do not game with money set aside to pay everyday expenses.
Right.
So that was our video on tips, responsible gaming tips. We are going to, we're a little beyond the planned ending time of 12 noon, and we're conscious that many team members actually have to return
Yes.
to their establishments. So Richard, if we could just if you can give us another 10 minutes, we'll skip that third video. And we will just go into the last few slides for Richard's presentation, and then we need to take some questions as soon as Richard gives us the go ahead.
Right. I am thinking my slides aren't moving.
Okay, while you try to get that ready, let me just deal with a couple of the questions. How
Sure.
do you go about helping a person that might be suicidal after losing a large sum of money after winning, but lose again all because of greed? So this question seems to be pointing to how does someone in a gaming lounge environment as a team member help someone who might be suicidal? And just to tack on to that, what are the things that we have to be careful about? Because if we suspect that someone may have a gambling problem, and in our poll, over 80% of participants in the poll who responded to say that they often see patrons who they believe have a gambling problem. So tips as to what a team member could do to help someone who has not actually reached out for support, but who we suspect has a problem gambling issue.
Okay. Let me just start by saying a lot of what I have learned about responsible gaming and gambling related disorders didn't just come from the book. It comes from doing these trainings with staff members of the gaming lounges, because they are out there on the floor and they can relate to me. And every training that I go to, they tell me something different that they've seen in terms of what patrons are doing. The issue of someone being suicidal is a very difficult issue, and one that the answer to that lies within RISE and the BGLC, because our training needs to go to another level where we're doing specialized training with supervisors, with these responsible gaming ambassadors, because I would not want or advocate for anyone on the floor to be addressing someone who is appearing suicidal. I would want for someone who has the ability through training that we have done with them. And so in many jurisdictions, that's what happens. We move to another level training, which does not include everyone. So let's call it level 2, with supervisors, with the responsible gaming ambassadors. And those are the persons that I want to teach the skills to be able to address and engage someone who's suicidal.
Okay, thank you for that. We had another question. What can be done for staff members impacted mentally from customers who themselves just developed mental health issues around gambling?
Well, what we would encourage is for the gaming loan staff to call us at Rice, to use that 188 number to be able to call and say, I'm calling about a gambling related issue. And we've talked about developing a specific program that deals with support for gaming loan staff. And so the only persons that come through that channel are gaming loan staff who may have issues with gambling, may have issues, mental health issues as a result of interacting with persons who have gambling disorders, etc., and provide that kind of support. So we are very open to that and for that. And we've provided services in the past, even recently, for persons in the gaming lounge. A manager may call and say, this person needs to get some help. They can call 1-888-991-4146, and assistance is provided. We always have counselors.
Great. Katie Ann Simpson has her hand up and has had it up for a while. Katie, I'm going to invite you to unmute your mic and ask your question, please. Katie Ann, do you still want to ask a question? I see your hand, you can unmute your mic. Okay, Abigail Allen had a hand up. Abigail, do you want to ask a question? You can unmute your mic to ask your question. Okay, it seems as if persons who want to ask a question, for some reason, they're not unmuting. If you can then type the question in the chat, we certainly will address it for you.
Okay.
Another question, if a person bans themselves for life, can that be reversed if they wish to reverse it after a period of time?
Right, and I get that question quite often. Unfortunately, yes, because it is a voluntary self-exclusion program, and the program is developed to help people who want to get help. And so we have had persons just in recent times who, because it's a legally binding document, we don't want to get into any court proceedings with persons about whether they can go into gamble or not. And so we want to stay with the persons who want to get help, and we're not forcing people to get help.
Okay, thank you. Abigail Allen, please ask your question. Unmute your mic and ask your question. Okay, Abigail can interrupt me if she's able to unmute her mic. In the meantime, another question is to keep this moving. What can be done for staff dealing with a customer that has a problem to the extent where they are begging money in order to gamble and will not admit it?
Can you repeat the question?
What can be done for staff dealing with a customer that have a problem to the extent where they are begging money in order to gamble and will not admit it?
All right, so I'm assuming here that the customer is asking the staff member for money. Am I correct?
It sounds so.
Right. And so we've had this discussion before. Absolutely not. No money is to be given to customers to encourage that type of behavior. And of course, if that is done, Jeanette, we know what's going to happen. The person is going to come back again and again. And so you don't want to be a part of that process. A person who is gambling to the point where they're asking a staff member for money must be left in a place where they can openly see that I have a gambling related problem, because here I am in the gaming lounge asking staff members for money. We don't want to deny them that opportunity to be able to see themselves. If you were to give them money, and I'm sure that would be against the policy of the organization, you'd be blocking them from seeing what are the consequences of your gambling. And one of the consequences is I'm completely broke. And you need to see that to be able to come out of denial.
I would imagine it would be appropriate at that point to actually point out to a supervisor or to a manager that this is happening so that they can deal with the matter for the employee. Okay. Katie Ann's question was, if I suspect a customer to have a gambling problem, what would be the best approach? This is a repeat of the question we had earlier, and I don't think there's any harm in reiterating. What is the process when someone suspects there is someone with a gambling problem? What's the best thing to do?
No, that's an amazing question. And those questions come up in most responsible gaming trainings. And a lot of that has to do with what's the policy of the gaming lounge in terms of engaging. So I give you an example. In some casinos abroad, staff members are allowed to engage with patrons because they're trained to. And so the type of engagement isn't, you look like you have a problem, let me talk to you. The type of engagement is, how are you doing? You look a little bit frustrated. Do you want to take a break? We can sit here and talk. It is really more empathetic than anything else. And that's very, very important in terms of your approach. So I don't know what the gaming lounge policy is, but hopefully we're moving to a place where each staff member has the ability to be able to engage in a non-judgmental manner by not just jumping out and saying you look like you have a problem. How are you doing? What you're trying to do is to get the patron to tell you what the problem is.
Okay, if a person bans themselves, can it be reversed?
If
a person bans themselves in the self-exclusion register, can it be reversed?
Yes, they can, but there's a process to it. Like I said before, it is called a voluntary self-exclusion. So persons who want to change that ban, there's a process, and the process includes engaging, talking, us trying to investigate what's going on. Why is it that you want to change the ban, etc.? Because one of the things we know that even when a person reverses their ban, we know we're being patient because we know they're coming back. Yes. So I give you an example. I have a client right now who, after coming back no less than 5 times, is finally at the place now where he's accepting the fact that he has to ban himself. And I face the frustration of doing this ban each time, but I needed for him to come to that place because I can't take him there. And he's now at that place where he's calling me now just during the day to say, I am doing so much better. I was kind of surprised why he called, but I am doing so much better. I appreciate the patience that you've had. So we understand when people reverse their bans, but I can tell you as night follows day, they'll be back. And we just have to be patient around that. The program is aimed at helping people who want to get help.
Okay. We had another question asking, and it referred to a specific establishment, which we won't name. How does the BGLC regulate responsible gaming at particular gaming establishments? If Laurie could join us and answer, how do we regulate responsible gaming? What are the expectations of the BGLC in regard to responsible gaming in the gaming lounges? That would be helpful for everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Jeanette. Well, certainly we want to see that there is a program of training, not just from the Rise Life, but there are adult training of the frontline staff on the various principles of the code of conduct that we have in place. In terms of the monitoring, naturally we will liaise with Rise to see if the training has taken place. Those who are supposed to have entered the organization new, and those who are there for a while, there are new persons entering the training program and their refreshers training. And also, do you have a self-exclusion program that is working? So, for example, when someone goes onto the database, we get an email. Likewise, I believe, Richard, the persons in the gaming lounges get that email. And certainly when a person comes off the ban period, an email is sent out. So certainly we would want to see from our vantage point that steps are taken that when the person is banned for that period, they are not given an ability to enter to game. And when they are returning, then certainly some steps are taken to allow them back. But we would want you to have some mechanism to constantly check in on those clients so that they don't revert to the situation.
And in terms of when we are doing compliance checks at various establishments, are there particular things that we're looking out for in terms of how that establishment is implementing their responsible gaming responsibility? Shall we call it that?
Well, yes. So certainly the code of conduct that is being issued now, we check to see, are they complying with the various elements of the code of conduct? Do they have the proper signage? Do they have the proper forms for the self-exclusion program? Do they have somebody liaising with Rise Life to keep a tab on what's happening with that customer? And certainly every communication that is being had with your players, we enunciate the tagline, game responsibly. And of course, those who are coming in and they are lingering, yes, Jeanette, certainly we would want them to have an interest, play a part of having a dialogue, show empathy to what's happening, understand their situation. And also, you want to make the money from this client, but also you also want them to game in a responsible manner. So, from time to time, we will be talking to the frontline persons to see how well do they understand their responsibility and how are they carrying it out at that point in time.
Okay, thank you very much, Laura. I will say that we have a responsible gaming code of conduct booklet that we can share with any gaming lounge that may want copies to share with their team members. It's also on our BGLC website because, of course, everybody's looking to do things online and also to avoid printing and so on. But if there are any gaming lounges that particularly want copies for their team members, you can email us at info@bglc.gov.jm with a request, and we'll arrange to get copies of the Responsible Gaming Code of Conduct to you so that you can share with team members. Another question, and I'm glad to see the questions. It's taking us over time, but I think it's important. So thank you to those who are able to stay online. If a customer wins and gives a staff member a tip, and then loses and asks that staff member back for the tip to buy back in, what should the staff member do?
That's a question for me or Lori?
A question for you, Richard, because it seems to indicate, for instance, that might be a sign that that person is having a bit of an issue. They have maybe they have overextended their financial resources. Maybe that's a sign of a problem. I don't know if there's a tip policy within the gaming lounge, but I think
exactly. So, but let me just say that this just shows the importance of having responsible gaming training, because receiving a tip from a customer immediately invites you into a relationship that is going to be problematic given the type of personalities that come into the gaming lounge. And so it would not be uncommon for the person to say, can I have my tip back because now I'm broke and I need to continue playing. But because we're doing this training, we are ahead of the game, and I would support the idea. I would not take a tip, because a tip is going to invite you into a relationship. And remember, what runs that place is money. You need money to game. And so if the tip is primary, it's just money, then obviously, and the personalities, we talked about that, the types of persons who come into the gaming lounge who have gambling disorders, they're going to ask you back, can I have it? Because they're thinking, maybe if I get this back, I can win again and start chasing. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So you're right. What's the policy on tips in that particular facility? But are there more questions? I just wanted to address something about the self-exclusion. And it is important for us to continue to up the game on it in terms of how quickly we register people, how frequently we go through the database and just make sure that everybody's up to speed. because we know the personalities of persons who have gambling disorders. And some of those personalities aren't exactly nice. I'll give you an example. I just got a call yesterday, and the gentleman is wanting to go on to self-exclusion. He signed up the form, but he is now saying to me, and very upset, can I sue the gaming lounge if after I go onto the program and be banned, they somehow let me back in? And of course, I mean, my response is to defend the gaming lounges, because the gaming lounges are really helping us by joining in with this program. However, we want to make sure, I'm just trying to show the mentality of some of the persons that we engage with who have gambling related problems. So his next bet is to sue the gaming lounge. And the gaming lounge really, by virtue of being involved in the program, is helping him. And so I'm saying to him, well, you can't sue them. They're really just helping. The onus is on him too to not go to the gaming lounge, not just of the gaming lounge not letting him in. I mean, we expect that 100%, but it helps better if he does not go, because that's what he signed up for.
Well, there's a follow-on question. For the persons who are banned from a particular gaming lounge, what mechanisms are in place to prevent them from going elsewhere? And that's what the self-exclusion does.
Right. So from some of these questions, we're seeing that we'll have to intensify the self-exclusion program, because just right off the bat, I said it's a national program. When someone is banned, they're not banned from a gaming lounge in Montego Bay and can come to Kingston. They're not just banned in Ocho Rios. And we explain to people when they get on a ban, that's why sometimes, Jeanette, people say, I don't want the ban because I only want a ban from Ocho Rios. The ban is national, the ban is island-wide. If persons are still able to get into gaming lounges elsewhere, then we need to put something more intensive in place to make sure there are penalties for that. That must not happen.
So, Richard, a gaming lounge, Jeanette is banned from a gaming lounge in Montego Bay. I don't gamble, I'm not allowed to. But for example, I'm banned from a gaming lounge in Montego Bay. What does Acropolis do if I go to that gaming lounge in Kingston to know that Jeanette is actually on the National Self-Exclusion Register?
Excellent. So when the person gets the ban official, fills out all the documentation, we take a picture of them as well, and that's put up on the database with all their information. We have the email addresses for all the responsible gaming ambassadors at all the gaming lounges. We then send out an email saying John Brown has requested a ban and received a lifetime ban. Please go up on the database, register him in your program, and then ban him. So the only way that John Brown can beat the system, which we have no control over, is if he goes there with an ID that says his name is Peter Richards. So once he goes with John Brown's ID, he should not be able to get in, because we do give the gaming lounges an opportunity and time to be able to go up on the database, take the information off, register him in your program, and then ban him. So when he comes with his ID, it should red flag.
Okay, thank you. What about an addicted customer who knows or realizes his or her issues regarding gambling problems, always saying that they want to ban themselves, but you still see them daily coming to the gaming lounges? And the question maybe is asking the same thing over and over again, but I think it's important to reiterate.
What to do with them? Remember, this is about an individual's choice. And even if they were to ban themselves, and it is based on the fact that they were pushed in that direction, they may want to reverse it. People have to come to that place where they decide that they need to get help. So while you can listen to them, you can be attentive to what they're saying, you certainly can't nudge them or force them in a particular direction. Remember, this isn't medication that we're giving to people that we can give you an injection and it doesn't matter if you want to take it or not. This is about counseling and choice. And so persons have to be at that place where they recognize that they need to get help and they are going to accept the responsibility of making a change.
Okay, great, thank you. Richard, the first question you had asked in the poll was, gambling is a fairly harmless and entertaining activity. And the result of that poll, we had 132 responses. Approximately 57% of the participants said they agree or somewhat agree, while just over 40% said they disagree or somewhat disagree. So we know that gambling is meant to be adult entertainment. But what would you want to say about that whole issue of gambling and its level of harmlessness or harmfulness and its entertainment, especially as it relates to problem gambling and our as employees and team members in the sector managing that?
Well, I mean, I'm not surprised, because even in our face-to-face trainings previously, I would ask that question and would get hands up polling. And it is about right in terms of how people feel about gambling. The main aim of that question, though, is to unearth for people their own value system about gambling, because your own value system and what you think about gambling, how you feel, will definitely impact how you interact with persons, with patrons, as well as how you interact with patrons who have a gambling problem. So if you think that gambling is an awful thing and you shouldn't be involved, for me, there'll be less empathy when you're dealing with someone who says, boy, this is going really bad for me, I'm feeling depressed. The idea will be, well, you shouldn't be inside here anyway because gambling is bad. So I want for people everybody who answer that question, to take from it where their own value system is about gambling and how that is going to impact how they interact with varying clients, people with problems, people with no problems, and see how best you can modify that, because the persons with gambling problems in the gaming lounges, they need empathy as well. They need understanding as well. But if your position is one that doesn't carry understanding and empathy because of how you feel about gambling, it is going to come off skewed to the customer. So that was the aim of that question, to highlight, bring about a greater awareness.
Okay, great. All right. As Richard said in his opening, Jamaica's Responsible Gaming Program is a model for other jurisdictions in the region, and has actually been featured at many international conferences. I think it's important that everybody understands how seriously BGLC takes the Responsible Gaming Program. Since 2005, when the program started, BGLC has invested over 100 million Jamaican dollars in developing this program. It is still an evolving and growing program. Every year we commit more and more funds to support the program, and we will continue to do that. I think the success of the program is very highly dependent on the efforts and input of all stakeholders, including you, our participants today, who directly engage with the customers. So I want to tell you that it's really important for you to stay up to date on responsible gaming matters and problem gambling. It's really important for you to continue to reach out to RISE, reach out to BGLC, whenever you have any questions or issues related to problem gambling. I want to invite you to follow BGLC and RISE on our social media channels, because that's where we consistently and continuously use those platforms to communicate responsible gaming tips, and always to provide information on how you can get support. So I'm going to ask our tech team to put up the slide with our social media handles, so that people can make note of them, and also follow us so that you can continuously get information. You can get tips, you can get facts and directions on where to get help for your customers and for yourselves. And of course, always you need to bear in mind the number to contact RISE, 1-888-991-4146. Another comment we have in the chat, thanks much for this educational program. but I won't be able to finish. The phone is dying. Somebody else also asked about being able to share if we're sharing the presentation. We'll arrange for the presentation to be put online on BGLC's website, and we'll certainly share a link to you. And so I want to just take this opportunity to thank Richard for this presentation and for his efforts in this a very important aspect of our delivering of gambling services to the Jamaican public. Remember, at any time, we are available to help. info@bglc.gov.jm is our email address for any questions at any time. We will repeat this webinar for those of your establishments who were not able to attend. I expect we shall do that. Maybe we can target sometime in April or May to do that, but of course we will send you out the information. Responsible gaming is something that we all should keep on top of, so there's no harm in repeating the webinar if you've already attended. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. We have gone over our planned time by 30 minutes, and that's because of your interest, your questions, your engagement, and the importance of the topic of responsible gaming for gaming lounges. We really do appreciate your attention, your time, and your commitment to this program, and want to wish you all a very happy and good and productive rest of the day and weekend. And we look forward to seeing you on this channel and by other channels very soon.
Thank you.